Welcome everybody to my acrylic painting session, and today we're looking at Florence, and I'm interested in showing how to paint maybe a certain part of the day. So we've got an early morning. I took this photograph about 5:30 in the morning in spring, early spring. So we've got very gentle light coming in with loads of kind of pale pinks on the sunset. That's why I've got a pinky background. And we've got loads of old church grounds. We've got some old walls of some of the ruins on top of the Florence Hill looking over the town. And these walls and ruins and kind of sections of architecture have loads of cool colors. So loads of greens, loads of turquoise, loads of blues. And I'm very much interested to have that contrast between the pink and between our cool colors. Okay. So I want us to kind of explore that element of it today. So on my palette, I have some white, I have some ochre, crimson, violet. So these ones are going to be just to support our cool colors here and there. But then we'll mainly work with our ultramarine, phthalo blue, and emerald green. Okay. So what I also have, I've got a big flat brush, perhaps a range of other brushes. I quite like my filbert brushes, flat brushes with a round end. And I'll probably use the same ones, but maybe just more of them, okay, later on. So let's start with mixing a little bit of cool color palette. I've got this little long strip of paper just to place a few colors together, and then we'll sketch our composition and we'll get started painting. Okay. So I want to use some of the cooler colors. I'm interested to see the range of those cool colors first. So let's pick up some white. And let's just check our colors on their own with some white, just to see what they're going to look like. Okay, so I have got my fresh ultramarine. Okay, I'll clean my brush. And let's put some white and phthalo blue. Let's mix them together. It doesn't matter what darkness it's going to be. I can definitely see my ultramarine is much more violet-y, and my phthalo blue is a little bit more kind of coming towards turquoisey blue, yeah, kind of our classic sky blue color. Let's mix a little bit of our green. Okay. So green is going to be much more different to our blue. It's close to the phthalo blue, but a bit more further away from that ultramarine. I can also use a little bit of violet, but perhaps not to make it too fresh violet, but closer to ultramarine. So if I use some white and a dab of violet and a dab of ultramarine, so it becomes much more bluer tone. Okay, I think that's will be much more the tone we might need. And that's will work beautifully with our pinks as well. Okay. And what I'm interested in now, in making perhaps some of the ranges between those colors. So let's say if I were to use my fresh ultramarine, okay, I can make it slightly darker. So I'm just going to put ranges of that ultramarine, maybe slightly lighter, slightly darker. Let's make it slightly lighter. Now, don't worry if it's a little bit too fast. I just want you to see it. If you mix some of them, that's brilliant. Just want you to see things, what they will look like for you. And I also want to start mixing it with a dab of violet, just to see what those changes, how gentle those changes of color can be. So, okay, they're quite close together here. And if I'll go for a little bit more of that violet. We'll start to intensify that purpley color, and maybe tiny bit more. Okay. Now we already mixed it with violet before, so what about if I'll mix some just a lighter version, just maybe some white. Adding just some fresh white to it, yeah. Okay. So just seeing that, just that range of possible blues we could be using for our buildings, okay, and how hopefully simply we can start mixing them without being scared. Okay, well, let's do the same with the blue here, with the phthalo blue. So if I'll use fresh phthalo blue and some white, maybe perhaps make it slightly lighter, maybe make it slightly darker, still with a bit of white. Yeah, that intensities and contrasts is similar, but the color itself, that's much more violet-y looking. Sometimes on my screen it doesn't come out as strong, but when you start mixing it, you should see that much more different. And then let's mix that blue with just a small dab of green, emerald green. That's quite a nice tone. Let's have a tiny bit more light to it again. So let's have a look for how it will start appearing if it's just lighter. Or let's go for a tiny bit more greener, not just lighter or darker, but changing its color. Okay, so it's still not fresh green. Okay, I think this one's gone a little bit more darker and a little bit more bluer again, but that's all good. I just want to see the variety. Okay. And what will be interesting to see is how our greens and blues and violets and blues will start interacting with our pinks. So if I were to use some white and crimson, which is the color for my background, and I'll just put it next to some of my colors here. And see that interaction. What I wanted to do, I just wanted to fill some of these gaps just to see what that combination, kind of what those contrasts will start to look like. If your colors, your pinky colors become too transparent, just a bit patchy, it will be harder to see the colors together. So just add a little bit more white for opaque contrast for your reds. Same here. just to see how it will start interacting, where it's overlaps or where it's just bordering it. I quite like when it's just bordering it. Kind of when it starts being, yeah, you can even paint over some of your blocks. Yeah. It's nice just to observe those colors, how they work next to each other. Now, acrylics is really good for this exercise because it dries so quickly. So the colors, so my greens and blues are not mixing with pink. They're standing out as a solid colors on their own. So for example, if these pinks of a couple of these turquoise and green, a little bit more dull because they're more transparent. So if I were to increase the opacity of the pink, they will stay quite powerful on their own. Okay, so it's those kind of contrasts we're looking. So when we start mixing colors, well, applying colors to the painting, we will have that order of different colors overlapping each other different times as they're drying. Okay, right, so I'm going to wash my brush. Quite happy with some of those exercises. If I'll find some interesting color combinations as I'll start painting, I'll also put them on the paper here, because we will have extra other ones mixed through the process. Right, so now I have a small round brush, well, a medium round brush, which I usually sketch with. And I think I'm going to go for a bit of ultramarine, maybe violet and white. I think I'm going to go for some violet and white. A little bit more closer to pink, so if I were to dilute it and sketch with it. So a little bit runnier to sketch with, so it will be easier for us to apply the color as we're working out our composition. So we have two parts of the painting. We've got a big chunk of sky. It looks a bit plain in the image, but I'd like to work on it a bit more and make it a bit kind of more interesting and exciting. But I'm just looking for the silhouette of it. Okay, so let's find overall tops of the lower trees on the left hand side and the silhouette of the close hills of the city here. Okay, there are some clouds above, but I'll come back to that. I have three groups of tall cypress trees, and so this is my center of the painting, so they'll be just off the center. So if that's my center, they will need to be just off the center. So if I just place them as little lines for now, maybe then I'll identify the most left ones. And then now they're coming off a little bit of my photograph, but I actually want them to be more within my painting. So I might just get that just in. Okay, I need to check the width of my trees. Perhaps that will be groups of twos there. Yeah, I haven't decided how low they're gonna go yet. I'll come back to that. I'm just trying to think of their maybe widths, their height, kind of rough placements as we're getting started. Okay, this one's gone maybe too high, if that is my line for the trees. Okay, maybe my line of the trees need to be a tiny bit taller, because that tree is mainly staying within that line. So we read mainly the group of twos. looks like a tree on the left in both groups at all. Maybe they've been planted in a similar time, maybe they're separately or planted or later, or deliberately got the height variety. Okay, that's quite an elongated shape tree here. Okay. There will be similar trees further down. So if I were to continue almost my diagonal here, I can just roughly see some other shapes appearing, and I can play with them. There will be some other ones at the back, but it just gives me some sort of kind of rhythm of the painting. Okay, rhythm of the painting via those horizontal strokes. What I'm going to look for next are these walkways, staircases. There are loads of platforms. It's quite complex what it is, how many different shapes there are. What we'll be looking at, we'll be looking for big shapes of light and dark and big shapes of color later on. So I don't want you to know exactly architecturally what's happening there. So we've got a little bit similar line to our tree line. I'm looking for all of those shapes. You know what? I think it's going to be much higher. I think that's where it's going to be. But this is going to be there's some sort of other shadow going on. I think that's a barrier for that walkway. So it's almost halfway through from the image horizontally. And it's taken all the way, almost not quite to the corner on the bottom right, but it goes straight, and then it just gently somewhere changes the angle. Some sort of gates there. But again, there will be loads of details which we don't really need, but that just kind of tells us a little bit more about what happens to some of the change of lines. Okay, we'll be looking at them as big blocks. There's a rooftop of probably a chapel here. Again, those are just exciting structures. Quite exciting structures. I just make a tiny bit darker color so you can see it better. So what I've done that triangle for the rooftop. Got a nice block. Again, I don't want you to spend hours on doing any of this. This needs to be something very quick and something very simplified. A little block standing over it. Okay. Well, I do remember it was a gorgeous morning, and there were loads of cats about, waking up, exploring. Nobody's about. A couple of figures in there, but we don't have to do that if we don't want to. But there were loads of silly cats about in the area. Right, so those big structures are done. Now let's have a look at the steps. Well, it's a steps type of structure again of them, a terrace. So almost from again our middle section, maybe let's have a look. It's somewhere in between our lower part of the painting and higher part of the painting. So the bridge is going to start just tiny bit higher. Well, bridge looking structure. I'm going to come up to our middle tree here. Okay, some are there. Just shrink it gently here. Got some lower trees behind it, and I quite like those arches. I think we've got 4 full arches and 1 half the arch. So if I were to roughly put it halfway through, then I know how many roughly arches I can fit in. I'm doing the straight lines just to help myself to know where the arches spaces would be. Now, if you were just to do a block to tell yourself this is where the terrace is going to be, well, it looks like a bridge in shape. So those will be plenty, that's just that block. And then we have the steps going over each arch as well. So if I were to divide my spaces into kind of segments for each individual arch, then it will be much simpler for me to do the steps. One is going to be just a little taller than the other. Okay, we do actually have continue those little substructures of, but we're gonna lose it as we start painting. So okay, and then that terrace, so the trees are in front of it all, and then that terrace continues tiny bit further, so we can see one more partial section of the arches, and then that structure turns. Okay, I can see a little, well, if we would have had more zoom in, we would have seen a little terrace going there. Okay. I think it's a gate, there's something else in there. So if I were just to put it all simplified. There we go. There are loads of intricate gardens, there are loads of details on the gardens. Again, I'm more interested in some of the basic lines. And when we'll start painting, we'll be looking at blocks of color, and we'll be working much more spontaneously rather than focusing on the details. But what we can do, we can identify those lovely hedges, those low hedges, just by using some of those lines. Okay, so maybe the tops of the hedges here, where the arches stopping, that will be another hedge going around. Okay. I'll see there what's a bit more there as well. Got something else parallel to it, the lovely semi-circle little line. Again, just as planning off direction. So that's our big gate here. Sorry, walkway here. And the gate, it looks like another gate there, loads of gates. Maybe dividing the park into different sections. Tourists, monks. So it's a beautiful viewing spaces to see the whole Florence. Now, this semicircle line, or those straight lines and semicircle shape, is symmetrical to another shape. So if I were to continue, so it's in perspective, There is another similar kind of shape, but looking at the opposite direction, it comes that way. So where that section's been, it's going to come up here. It's much more open, and then it's straight, comes out straight again. So that will be my hedge. Okay, and that's kind of structure. Stays in. Again, when we start painting and putting the color on, okay, it's all reflecting here. It will be a little bit easier for us to see. Okay. I think we're more or less done with the drawing. I just do a distant building as a very simple shape, and then give you time to catch up. So in our view of the town, we've seen a couple of light buildings hidden behind the trees. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to introduce some of the vertical lines just to show perhaps part of the edges of the buildings, how they maybe structurally develop, and then a rough rooftop. So that's the lightest, another some sort of building, villa, and then it will be just all surrounded by trees. It's come out quite dark than the shapes around it, but it's okay. We can work with that. What I can do, I think I'm going to pick up my horizon here a tiny bit more. So then that villa is hidden within the greens of the Florence. There are the small buildings that are much more insignificant. And I can work for some of the low clouds shapes. Got classic Florence hills at the back, but because of the mist you can't see them, but I think I might just introduce them there as well. Now let's start introducing some of the colors, and let's just start thinking of shapes of them, and that will correct our drawing. It will amend the layout of things as well. Now I usually start with painting the sky. This time I want to work into some of the medium tones of the landscape, and then bring some darks and maybe go for the light ones afterwards. So I'm interested in finding the color, overall color for most of our buildings here, that kind of very lighter version of turquoise. So perhaps something like this. And I want to build up on some of the greens and then the shadows. So it will be easier for us to see where it is on its own, rather than just trying to do a drawing of it. So let's have some white. Okay. Let's have mainly phthalo blue. And let's have a small dab of emerald green. Now we need to make it quite light. So I will need to add more white to all of this. And I want to keep the color quite solid. Now using pink as a background could give us loads of challenges, because not covering pink will make our green or turquoise or even blue quite muddy. Okay, so we might need to top up a couple of layers of it afterwards as well. So let's just go for overall shapes. of the top part of this lovely garden wall. Okay. Immediately against the pink, it's almost glowing. I can immediately have that impact on my eyes. It's a little bit, it's very settled, yeah? It's not, maybe tiny bit lighter than the pink, or more or less the same darkness. But the contrast is so opposite, it's quite hard to look at it. And I painted the whole structure of it here. And what I'll do below, I'll do some of it and maybe preserve some of my violet lines, just so I can see the structure a bit better, because I will be adding other colors to it afterwards, not to keep it too simplified. But for now, all of that part will remain the same color. Okay. And I'll do the same for the side here of the same lovely walkway, lovely viewing platform here at the top. It doesn't matter if it will come out a little bit awkward, just a shape over, kind of showing us some sort of width there. Extra arch space. It's maybe that lighter painted surfaces, perhaps once being white. Okay. And let's find something similar in color elsewhere in our piece. For example, on the top of the rooftop next to us. For example, on little borders, maybe a thinner line, but just find a rhythm of some of these structures. Part of some of these walkways, I think they will have a similar color, but maybe a little bit darker, so I'll leave it out for the moment. There's some sculptures that are part of the perhaps cemetery here. So let's put a few just marks and blobs of color going vertically and horizontally, just identifying the shapes. Not interested if it's an angel, a particular gravestone, or something specific part of the wall or fence. I'm interested into those little marks of color and maybe variety of their size. Okay, I'm more interested into that. Something's happening here. And there is something that's happening here, but it feels like if I can do it a little bit lower with some of my shapes, that should do the trick for me. Some of other continuous lines could be added later as well, but that's our starting point. Perhaps on the rooftop, just a tiny bit more. And again, we can always come back to the same color, but it just gives us that more of a glow, more of a standing out colors and kind of identification of some of the areas. Something coming in here as well as a block. So loads of suggestiveness, but nothing too specific. Okay, I think that's enough for that color. And I want to make the same one, but slightly darker. So I need to have some extra white. Yes, I have just run out of my white. So again, phthalo blue, some emerald green, just a small amount of it. I want to see that turquoisey color. So if my blue is overwhelming, I need to add a little bit more green to that. Okay, it looks like a good color. I need to test it against my background to see if I'm on the right track. So I feel we've got that path, that part of the road here. I think if I were to put it slightly darker here. Yeah, I think that will do nicely. Again, just trying to gently give myself an idea of those maybe gates of where they're going to be. So that intricate playfulness of the lines allows me to preserve some of the pink just gently here and there. These gates are going to have a bit more light on them. It is suddenly slightly darker than what we had earlier. And perhaps this area will come a bit more stronger here as well. So my color is totally opaque. It doesn't let me leave any of the pink behind unless it's on the sides of it. Let's have a look where some of this color could be elsewhere. Some part of our walkway will have that darker tone as well. Maybe just above the arches, I might bring it in some places, maybe not everywhere, but just a few hints of the darker color, maybe underneath of that walk itself, and maybe just showing a bit more the area where it's been worn out, the paint's been changing its color, it's been weathering. Those elements slowly starting to be edited and captured. Doesn't have to be identical. Just bring some of these gaps lower before painting the trees, so that it will be easier for me to paint the trees afterwards. Good. So that was one of our similar colors we already used here on our palette. So we just used two of those greeny blues. And let's have a look now at some other colors close to the ones we just used. So how about if we start going towards more blue, more fresher blue, and more ultramarines. So let's mix. So the color we just had, just let's add a tiny bit more white to it and tiny bit more phthalo blue. So it's will stay slightly darker. Phthalo blue is quite a dark pigment. Okay, and let's just add a couple of varieties of subtones. Now here I can't quite see it as much because it's still slightly wet area, but it's quite nice blue tone. Let's put somewhere a bit more darker blue, maybe a tiny bit more darker actually. You can see it better earlier on. So we're working in subtones, but the color is changing. So perhaps something here will be changing. Okay. Perhaps few other individual marks will come in. I can see maybe our rooftop here could have even maybe stronger phthalo blue. Excuse me. Okay. Loads of again old walls which has been weathered, and the light paint partially peeling off, partially lichen is appearing on it. So it's a lot of changes and loads of colors, subcolors appearing here and there. A couple of columns, but I can see the tops of those columns might have a little coolness to it. So if I just add a bit of mark making here, it might just pass that kind of rhythm without telling us too much information. Maybe my gate post will have some more darkness without again me painting the full gate. I'm more interested in a few kind of shapes. This looks quite crudely done gate for now. I might just keep it just for now as it is. And I think it might be a bit too strong. So if I were to use my sponge and wipe it off. Not just strong in color, I think the darkness of it is too bold and it stops my painting immediately. So I'm gonna just wipe it off and perhaps work on it later on. Much more gentler. So I want all of that continuing moving. I think if I were to bring more of that blue across, it just continues that line moving. Okay. Got some extra depths with use of ultramarine blue. So if I'll go for fresh ultramarine blue and just a small dab of white, I want to keep it quite dark though. Again, I'm using white to keep it opaque. Okay, so that's my nice strong blue. Again, something similar we mixed earlier here. And I think that will be a really good color, perhaps to offset some of the shadows here at the front. Again, some of the pinks. So if I were to leave some of the pinks, just kind of naturally, okay, I'm running out of paint, I haven't mixed enough. If we leave a little bit of pink naturally, as part of that line glimpse, if we lose it, that's okay, we can always bring it back if we decide to. But it just gives us that bit of darkness. Gives us that little bit of extra darkness here. Some sort of steps actually. So I'm looking for shapes and connections of these shapes together. I'm very keen to get started on some of the hedges, even with some of this green, but I might just give it a moment longer, not to touch them, but let's go for the arches. If let's paint for the inside shapes of the arches, just make sure they do stay dark. Now, so far, ultramarine is the darkest color we've got. And double check the widths of the arches and kind of the gaps between them, so they're not too big or not too small. They're not tiny.
Julia, Julia, the color you're just doing now, is that phthalo blue or ultramarine?
Ultramarine. So the same super dark one, ultramarine. Yeah.
Oh, right. I thought that was phthalo blue. Right. Okay.
That's okay. Just add a dab of violet to it, and you'll have your ultramarine.
All right. Thank you.
That's okay. I've started with a darker blue here for some of these ones. They were more phthalo blue, yeah. And then these ones are now a little bit more darker. It's any combination of those both blues will be fine. So if you've done them in some places, leave them and then just move on to ultramarine. Don't repaint them. Okay, I'll carry on with my arches here. Again, I'm just deliberately making them slightly longer at the bottom because I'll be putting my hedges there. So it will be easier for me to fix the lines at the base. And my fluid brush helps me to do the roundy ends for the arches as well. Now, so far they're a bit flat. They're just looking very similar. quite like those columns. Maybe just see if we can explore them a little. And if there will be too much, we can always reduce them to simpler marks. I think that rhythm will be good for later. Kind of well, the rhythm of the arches we've got. I think that will be a little bit more lost within the greens, but I think that contrast will be quite good to have afterwards. Okay, so those are dark. So we worked into some of our blues and turquoises. We haven't quite done much greens yet. We have done a little bit of our fresher blues. Let's work into some of the paler violets. So violet and ultramarine blue, maybe violet on its own. Let's find different those darknesses. So I have some, I've washed my brush, I have some white. Can use a small amount of ultramarine and some violet. And I'm going to go for a medium tone. So if I were to put it next to my darker blue, yeah, it looks much lighter. But if I were to put it against some of my paler colors, let's say that a color for the turquoise I use, so that feels a bit more darker. Okay, so it's somewhere one of those tones we mix, one of those colors we mixed earlier. So what I want to do here, I want to add some more details on our terrace here. So perhaps around okay, the bridge, okay, I can't quite see it as much, so it means that I need to make it slightly darker. Just make it tiny bit more intensive. Put a little mark over it and see if that's dark enough. Yeah. So I want to show maybe a little bit of extra darkness. I want to use that color or variations of that color, maybe slightly darker or lighter over the arches. Now, when I will be painting over the arches, some of the areas I can paint quite boldly and quite fully around the arch. In some areas, let me just get some more color, a tiny bit darker version of it. I'll just make the kind of the arch which might be a bit more broken, or might be fully painted or partially painted. Okay, so then I will start have a bit more light, which is varied, yeah, which shows sections of them that architectural structure, rather than this is precise arch going around, or what's happening with these columns, or what's happening underneath. So it's a little bit of here and there within that color. Okay, we're leaving part of our turquoises, and maybe also I can do a little bit of playfulness of of marks above as well. Excuse me. And I can make it slightly darker, slightly lighter, gently varying it. Just want to make that change happening. So we're still keeping our greens in areas, and some places it will be going. Again, that just shows the variety of color, the playfulness of it, quite a musical feel for it, but also tells us the building is quite old. It has a lot of weathering. Okay. If I'll overwork my violet, I can top it up with some green, with some turquoisey colors, but I think it's going okay so far. So that's probably as much details as we want. We don't want to over paint it. Also, this weathering doesn't have much perfection of structure if it's one section has more weathered areas than others. There isn't any particular reason for it. Might even add a little more details for the arches themselves. I'm not sure if there's some gates or there's some sculptures there or some sort of lines, or so that might just give me that less perfect feel for the spaces behind them. And let's have a look where else we can see this lovely violety blue. Maybe on top of this terrace, a few rooftops. So maybe just a few structures here. Okay, I'm just preparing for my hedge here, just double checking I have my vertical lines vertical. Perhaps some of these columns or shapes will have a little bit of that darkness. Or that purpleness. And if I were to go slightly more fresher violet and no blue in it, let's just make sure it's dark enough here. Be similar darkness as what we were looking at the blue when we were painting with ultramarine. So I think that might be good for this section of the rooftop. Again, look for the volume of color, the shape of it, rather than exactly how our mind might interpret it for us. Mind is trying to simplify things for us. We just need to allow it to switch off a little. Lighter violet maybe here. So I'm now working with violet, making it slightly lighter, slightly darker. Darker was first, and then I'm gonna go for orange. Can finish this wall. Maybe put another part of the gate structure. Maybe touch up this wall, finishing off a little more into the darks. quite like some of these lovely pinks, but they're so dark, it's harder to work with them. So let's just reduce that. I'm in a way adding a little bit of extra details, but at the same time losing it. So my color, in a way, almost like it's just supporting different areas of the painting. Can go for the rooftops of the building of the villa far back. So the rails, just a little continuation of something, and then it disappears. So it looks like something is changing, something is moving, light is changing, that's why we can see it, and then light is changing elsewhere, and now we can't see it. And all is left is the playfulness of the colors and the atmosphere these colors created, rather than, oh, this is a specific gate and this is specific space and this is, yeah. We're building up those bold, vibrant colors in support of our atmosphere. I'm going to try this darker violet for part painting sections behind our arches, just to make them less flat at the back. Maybe just a little mark here and there, just to continue it a little, just to make it less similar. Okay. I also feel we can use one of those violets. Let's try maybe a medium violet for the backdrop of the hill. Might add other colors to it afterwards, but as a base, I think against the pink, it looks quite pale. But when we'll start it in even lighter tones, I think that will be quite solid dark. So I'm adding more solid color at the hill. And now there are uneven edges to that silhouette. For now, I can keep it simplified. You know, there are loads of little trees and loads of silhouettes, but we want to keep the unity here first. Okay, of those, there might be a house there, but I'll reduce it all to one shape. I can see a bit of pink behind it. That's good. If I don't, that's fine as well. I probably will be using some of the pinks, reintroducing it on top of the violet there. And that silhouette slightly continues behind our trees, but if I'll just add a little line, just in case if I'll end up seeing it somewhere behind, but our trees will have a bit more green in them. Okay. And I also want to do the mountains at the back. And I'll use a paler violet. So I'm just adding even more white to my violet, and I do want to bring a hint of ultramarine. So again, one of the colors we used before, but much lighter version of it. So when I put it as my mountains, which are not seen in the photograph because of the fog, but I'm going to put those distance mountains here. Okay, and then I'll go lower and perhaps add a tiny bit even lighter tone close to the edges of the distant hills. So then the hills will stand out even stronger in darkness. Just a gentle one. If you do flat color for all of those shapes of the mountains, that's fine as well. Now this beautiful light violet. Let's have a quick look where else we can see it in our piece. I think I can reinforce some of it. And that's where the playfulness of the work is going to start. Kind of introducing it in small quantities as little marks or part of the surfaces structures. Quite like the idea of having that pale violet as the top of my hedge here. I might be totally wrong, but it feels right so far before I introduce that green. It looks like maybe almost that light from the sky, sketching that coolness of it. It might be the, not quite morning frost, but almost as that morning feel for it. Now, the other side might have a little bit less of it, and it might have another color as well, but just, you know, that structure, which is a little bit more symmetrical, but in perspective. It's a fence if it's getting some light broken down. I want you to have a feel for it. I want you to have, oh, it feels like I could put a couple of extra marks here, or I can add something else there. Now the pink is beautiful. The pink is started to glow from underneath of our work, even if we're not going to end up with loads of it left. Right, now I'm going to start filling up some of my greens, and I will start with some of the darker greens, some of these cypress trees. So that will be my Phthalo blue or ultramarine with emerald green, but at some point I will also mix some violet with it. So emerald green, I think I'm gonna go for ultramarine first. Okay, if I'll use a dab of white, it will make it less transparent. Okay, I can still see some strong green in it, but I need that darkness as well. Sometimes the darkness is easier to make by using the violet. That's why I suggested the violet earlier on. Right, so let's make those shapes quite dark. Could even go darker, but that's okay. Let's leave it as it is for now. And let's now find those silhouettes of the trees. And play with the characters, or at least kind of start discovering what those characters trees could be. And then we can adjust them. Okay, so they're going to come close to that structure we painted. And next one. So so far I'm just using the same color and I'm blocking the trees. Got some interesting shapes, some of the bulk edges on one side and the other side, and they swap sides. Interesting how the tree develops. Quite like very architectural structures, these cypress trees. Just open up my paint and making sure it's not transparent. Okay, this one could have a bit more of a gap, but I think I quite like it as it is. I can see it roughly where my steps needed to be, just kind of that contrast, and then almost like non-contrast and a bit more structure there. That's plenty for us to work with. Okay, let's have a look at these trees below. Again, I'm slowly running out of paint, so some more green, some more white, some more ultramarine. Now, painting over the area of sky, which we haven't done, means that I will more likely need to get back to those trees to shape them up again. So don't spend too much time to the tops, because they will have that structure changed. Okay. So they're quite flat, these trees at the moment. And I can also add a shadow of similar kind below them. And on the side here, so then I can see that width of the hedge. And that width of the hedge continues somewhere here. That's why these figures are here. Ah, that's a different one. Okay, let's have a look. I think I've gone too far. Oh no, it's okay. Let's have a look if I were to add more. Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so this one's here. I just extended it slightly differently, but that's all good. So those could stay there. Plus minus if it's slightly bigger, slightly smaller. It's a garden with uneven structures. So it's very adaptable. Okay, need some more paint again, some more emerald green, some more ultramarine, some more perhaps double violet. Want to make this big dark shadow as well. And maybe this hedge will have the widest edge. It's closest to us. And then finally, I'll introduce a few cypress trees in there as some shapes of individual trees. I think that's a bigger tree. We can go slightly lighter tone for the distant trees. So a dab of white, a very small dab. Again, we haven't done the house there yet, but that rhythm again of little build-up of shapes creates a buzz and creates a little more of atmosphere build-up. A tiny bit of the tree behind so we can see how it's offsetting our cypress trees here. Sky, so that's might be changing the shape of my the silhouette of my tree finally. So that is more or less the same color. I think I might have done a bit more violet in it, but it's a much lighter version of green. It's immediately offset, that almost like a barrier for us. Those trees are behind and that space is further distant away from us. Well, keep it in more white and a double violet. More violet. So it's kind of greeny gray, greeny violet. I think that will be a good color for again for some distant details, maybe just a few marks. So it just doesn't look, those hills doesn't look too plain. They're busy with light, they're busy with life, they're busy with structures behind those lovely gardens. It's a famous big city of Florence. It's a busy environment when, yes, so these are kind of villas supporting all these beautiful cathedrals and churches and galleries. And if I'll keep it in more white. So I haven't quite used green for my trees yet. There will start some of it coming through in this light, kind of this area in the middle ground. But I'm just adding more white and it just appears quite gray on my palette. If I'll just leave it here, it looks quite grayish violet. It's almost like ashy type of color. I think it just settles in quite beautifully. I know I'm painting over my trees and it's starting to look a bit silly, but that's okay. We can work with it afterwards again. Yeah, that ashy green, ashy gray is a good color for some of our greens in the middle ground. We used this color here already before, so I'm just touching it up. Okay. Now I want to come back to our trees. Some of those larger trees in the distance. And what I'd like us to do, I'd like us to, again, use the same colors, ultramarine green and emerald green and ultramarine blue, and mix maybe a lighter version color. Okay. And if there is a bit of gray on your palette or that violet on your palette already, that's fine. Again, we're looking for something a little bit paler to your existing trees. So we can just create a fleeing light, just touching some of these trees. It's just first light. It's only low horizon sky, sorry, sun. It's only something comes through gently, just about that magic of light. Okay, this might be on top of some of our hedges. Maybe just this one, just it's in the shadow, so let's give it a little bit of that light. And let's have tiny bit of darkness to some of our other trees. So like we've done the lights, you can also do a bit of shadow. So the same color, but slightly darker concentration of our pigments. I quite like these grays, but they're a little bit too blank. So if we put something a little bit below, let me make it slightly darker. I think I still like that combination of green, blue, and violet together. Just as you mix your colors, just having a slightly different proportion of them makes it very exciting. Or a bit more greener, or a bit more bluer, or a bit more violet, yeah. So quite impressionistic, just a little something darker, lighter, buzzing about. And we can do our cypress trees, our main cypress tree, slightly darker too. So let's get again, definitely this time, violet and emerald green. The violet will make the color much, much stronger. We only need small amounts of it. And let's find some of the contrasts, and they will stand out much more gentler than we might think. Okay, and again, give it a little more playfulness to your strokes. Really look for them where those shadows are going to be. Do they need to be too perfect and continuous on one side, or can they be a bit more stronger on one corner and much more gentler further? Okay. Maybe some of the trees will have more of a border between them. I think this one might be done a bit darker, as I can't see much difference here. Okay, I think it's just my reflection. So just a gentle change. That could go together. That's good. And that base we've done earlier, it's really supporting the image of the trees. This could have a lot of silhouette building against the lighter trees. Okay, that's good. And again, to keep the whole piece together, I'm going to add similar darkness in a couple of elements and a couple of points on our kind of maybe hedges, just to kind of reinforce that the trees are not flowing, kind of not floating. They're kind of a bit more grounded. So maybe this hedge will have a bit more darkness. Maybe behind some of the arches, I'll have a little bit of that darkness. Smaller brush might be a good one as well to it. So then we've got a bit of violet in there, we've got a bit of blue, we've got some of this shadow. So we've got the depths suddenly comes into the piece. Okay. And if some arches will stay and more or less unchanged, that's fine as well. Just show the different spaces and different areas. I also want to use this color perhaps to unify some of the shadows here, just across. And the little pillars which will have slightly beautiful light coming over them shortly. If I'll keep them, kind of reinforce some of their structure, I think that would be good as well. Done a bit of shadows for my trees at the back, again close to the depths of the walk. That's given much more depth immediately here. So let's just do a little similar things here. Maybe come back to some of the cypress trees. I think I'm ready for a smaller brush here. Okay, let's have a hint of green and then some light coming through on our sky, and then the rest could be playful details really. Now my lighter green, now if I were to go for sunny happy green, mixing emerald green with ochre or mixing emerald green with yellow, I'll lose my picture very quickly. So I need to be extra careful of how much of that color I'm using, and maybe make my decisions deliberately for the painting to work, rather than, okay, I'm seeing the lovely light greens. Okay, let's just, how do I paint? How do I mix lighter greens, yellow and green? Yeah, no, let's see what colors will work together for us here. So let's wash my brush here first. Let's have some white. Let's mix a little bit of color and place it in our painting and make those judgments. So let's use a bit of emerald green on its own with some white. Okay, I think that's on its own, looks quite good. So looking at my emerald green and pink just gives me that glow of green, quite excited. So I'm gonna just put a couple of areas where that lighter green could be. It's already starting to look, I don't know if it's the same for you on the camera, but to me it looks so much warmer. It looks so much fresher green, as in fresh spring green, new leaves, and the lovely sunshine, what just kind of might be coming through. Okay, I think maybe the line is not quite straight here to what I wanted. So it's better. Let's bring it back. I think that will work quite nicely. I thought I might need to bring ochre to it, but I think I might be only using it for a little bit of sky. Okay, so just keep that color opaque again. Make sure you mix it with enough white so the color is strong, doesn't stay transparent or patchy. Again, we've got a nice green green tree, group of trees here on the side as well. If I were to put it straight away bold light, it might be too strong. So I'm going to start it with using slightly darker emerald green first. If I've got any other blues around, no, I think blues might be a bit tricky. Let's go for a little bit of violet with it. Green and very small amount of violet. So it still looks bolder green in comparison to the rest of the colors in the area, but the violet tones it down and still allows it to be kind of fresher green. Okay, maybe a tiny bit more light, a tiny bit more green here. Lovely fresh colors. And work for the environment where you might want to have some of that. I might preserve some of my pinks here. I might cover some of the areas I'm not sure about. Might bring some of this green here and keep these structures a bit more vague. Maybe there's some more greens working into this section. Maybe there is a lawn. And then I can come back to my fresh emerald green, and just on the tips of the trees, how we were doing it there. Maybe just add that lighter, fresher emerald green. Little playful strokes, excuse me. Excuse me, I forgot to switch my phone off. Sorry about that. Let's continue with our emerald green. With some bigger strokes, some smaller strokes, some sort of softness coming into that green. I might even give a little hint of the light far back in the valley. Or maybe a couple of lighter greens, maybe just coming close to the cypress trees. Maybe that light just coming through some of the branches, I think, against some of the pinks. Let's give it some beautiful glows. And then our green can help us out to bring a few more highlights on part of the hedges, little playfulness, on part of the structures of that walk on top of our structure. Okay, that's might be too green. Okay, that's okay. Any other highlights on top of some of the turquoisey colors we worked in? So the color, the emerald green will start to support it extra. Okay, maybe part of those lovely gates. Now some of that. Okay, that's definitely need to have a smaller brush or more pattern structures which are not too defined. Okay, that's quite nice. It's not too clear, but something is happening there. Okay, I think that might be enough of my green. Just double check any other darks, if any of that need to be supported with any blues or any in-between tones. Okay, just doesn't, that strong dark tone was just taking the image away. And that's making it slightly lighter, settles it. Okay. If in doubt at this stage, just play with your colors and allow yourself to be a little bit more free, where you can use any of the colors we used already. Yeah, from lighter to darker to purple to blues to, just be careful with not overdoing it, but at the same time give yourself the playfulness of suggestive, creating kind of suggestive environment. So if I've got my purple a bit too boring, too similar, maybe I'll add a bit more extra green to it. Maybe there will be some extra blue coming, some fresher, paler blue. I think if I'll pick up a smaller brush finally. Right, so I'm using some white and I'm going to use some fellow blue, just as a fresh, lighter blue, just for a few more nuances. I want to know the volume of my highlights before I do all my paler skies. So I wanted, quite like some of these singing, gorgeous greens. I want to have a little bit more refresher for some of the walls, maybe surfaces, maybe a little extra highlights over some of the colors, but I can still see the other colors maybe still on the top, oh sorry, below it. that will have a little bit more contrast. Maybe use more blobs and dots. That's a nice, okay, maybe that pale blue will go with some of our balustrade here. Maybe a tiny bit darker. Some of the columns. Again, it might not need to be done as much. Just look for perhaps a playful pattern, or if something else in your work just need a little bit of extra balance. Use it to kind of to help you, not to make things more complicated. You might not need to do any of it now already. So you don't have to do it, because I feel in my piece it might be beneficial. Okay, something a bit too sharp in line. I want to keep it more soft. Okay, just a little hidden. This becomes a bit more extra playful. I love the pink appearing here and there. I don't want to have too many lines here, so let's we've got loads of purple lines, we've got loads of darks, so let's maybe make a little gate here, which tells us it's some sort of road, but also it's almost hidden partially in that morning light. Do we need to tell the full story of it, of the gate here, or the distant gate? No, maybe it will be just little glistening something, or maybe don't even need to have much of it, or not at all. And this corner got a tiny bit more lighter. Okay, I think I've lost my building at the back, which I totally forgotten. I wanted to make a villa, but I think it's working quite nice without it now. So if you have got a villa or you want to bring it back, you can. I might just put a little bit of that paler blue for it, just to keep the atmosphere of the place. Maybe it's some sort of lighter building, and maybe partially of that pink will support that suggestion. Maybe another lighter something on the horizon. I think darker trees over the villa looks better. I think I've just overworked my shapes of the trees, and it's that jumping towards us too much, those shapes. Easier to work over the light tones. Okay, let's keep it that way. It's a bit more settled now. tiny bit lighter so that my trees stand out in front of it. That's it. Something there, but not too overly important. Right, okay, and let's do our sky. Now I've got my large brush and I want to use some diluted color. I'm going to go directly with white, and I'll have a small amount of crimson, and then I would like to go for more fresher white as well. So if I place this slightly diluted, not as thick as I was painting so far, and build up some of my light above this darker cloud. Getting some more white now. So I'm keeping stronger white, sorry, stronger lighter tone of this pink close at the bottom, yeah, close to that shadow, shadow of a cloud. And the top line, I'm wiping my brush. I'm going to add more water to the paint. And I want to soften that edge. And make it partially transparent. Now, at the moment, it looks more solid, but now when it's all dry, it will be much more transparent. I can help myself with a sponge, if you've got a sponge or a larger even brush, to have that softness introduced, much more simpler. Okay, now just be careful with a sponge if you are using a sponge, because it could be a bit too strong. I've got a little mark here of stronger crimson, and sorry, when I was doing my sketch, so let's have some crimson and white and just paint over it. Might need a couple of layers. Okay. So that's a nice glow there. Now we can have again some extra pale pink, a little bit more solid this time, close to our mountain ridge. Okay, and we can work into that quite confidently. Now, some brushes are a little bit more, I think this big large brush is really good for diluting colors, but at the moment I want to have some solid color. It starts causing me lots of problems. It starts being very patchy. So I'm moving to a different brush. So white and crimson. Okay, they're quite a shallow edges for these mountains. Okay, and my cloud, which is looking a bit silly now, if I were to add a dab of violet and just blend it together with my pink and white, I'll start have a faded shape. Okay. is quite nice, but a little bit too patchy. So I can increase its darkness only gently, only because it is patchy. Okay, I don't want it to be lost. I want it to be kind of appearing more of like a mountain. So I'll be using some fresher light, fresher white, and I'll be using some stronger pink to offset this, to create a bit more contrasts. As we know, when we're painting clouds, to make them more realistic, we need to have something sharper as part of the silhouette, and we also can have some of the very soft and transparent layers. So we can have the sharpness by adding light next to the clouds, or blending them within the environment they're in. I think my pale tone I was working and diluting, I think it's dried way too light, too low, so I can go maybe a bit more stronger with my white. And in the top left corner, I want to be really bold, and I want to go for white and a dab of emerald green, and see what's going to happen to my cloud. That gentle boldness of the green almost makes that cloud looking in the shadow look like it sits in the shadow as part of its not in full light. Okay. That emerald green could, I think, could go for part of my other cloud here below. And if the colors are still wet and your pink violet will start mixing with a little bit of green, you will just have a neutral gray, which is totally fine anyway. Just want to make my cloud a tiny bit more darker here. And because of all this wonderful texture on the sky, I also want to put some of the texture on my mountains. That might be enough, so it's not just too plain, just a little bit of that light coming into the valley. Fresher pink. That's quite good. And as my white is drying, I can top it up, or I can keep it textured. That's unfortunately time to kind of to wait and see what that white is going to do. I want to keep it partially diluted. I want to have, don't want to have the thin strokes, which I ended up with as I was diluting the color. So a little bit of that light. So where I've got loads of texture on the sky, compensate for variety of color on the ground, on the trees. on the architectural elements. Again, as my green is drying here on the sky, I can see where I can add a bit more fresh white again. So instead of plain sky, as I ended up in my photograph, which my lens and the camera wasn't able to pick, this lovely range of lights becoming much more wonderful and buzzing. I think I'll just do a couple of lighter blobs to show the unevenness of the silhouette here. Show some of the trees, maybe show some of the reflections of the light elsewhere in the valley. And I'm good to stop. So I've got exciting greens and blues, beautiful turquoises, working together in the most wonderful way with the pinks. And some of the pinks in the foreground, which are still remaining, become quite exciting as well. So you can add more details, but be extra careful to keep overall simplified shapes on the foreground, part of the middle ground. So it's not going to be competing with that wonderful playfulness of the color altogether. I hope you had good fun and you're going to continue having good fun working on this piece. And I'll look forward to seeing your work afterwards.